Okay, has everybody wrote down something? We'll carry on. So we're going to do a quick check-in. So in the message side of the screen, I'd just like you to all put your name, please. State your name, and I just want you to pick one word to describe how you're feeling right now and just write it down. Does everybody know where the chat is? If you don't, just turn your mic on and I can tell you where it is.
Where is it, please?
It's on the bottom where you press participants. If you click on that, it should come up and you'll be able to type on the right hand side. Okay. Curious, intrigued, hopeful, interested, or like multitasked. Got a tired, which is understandable, probably all been at work today. Motivated, love that. Okay, and if you've got any questions as we go through the workshop, if you could write them on that on the side there, and what we'll do is when we come to the middle and we do a check-in halfway through, I'll go through some of the questions and we'll answer them, but we'll also be doing that at the end as well. So if you have a question afterwards, that's absolutely okay. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to look at what CFT is, and we're going to go through all the basic principles that make CFT theory. What we're going to do in the future, hopefully before Christmas, is add workshop to this. So we're working with CFT, where I'll bring together a case study and go through and show you how I integrated this into the way that I work. So also give demonstrations to the interventions that I've used. So tonight's going to be very theory based, and a lot of the slides have got a lot of theory on, and that is so that you can take it away and kind of develop this if you want to start working with it, especially if you come to the working with, and then you'll see demonstrations of the interventions. I learned this and was lucky to learn this under Elaine Beaumont while I was on my master's, and she is one of the authors of the Compassionate Mind Workbook with Chris Irons. At the end of this workshop tonight, there's also a reference list and there's wider reading on there if anyone's interested. But she does a lot of research as well. At the moment, she's developing a Compassionate Mind app that they are hoping to kind of develop and put out to the public. And there's 100 participants, I'm one of them, and up to now the app is amazing, and I think it'd be really great to use with our clients, so I'll update you in the future with that. So let's get started. So what is CFT? So shame and self-criticism can often arise from abuse, neglect and bullying. People who may experience come to feel that their internal and external words are always, sorry, one sec, on the brink of hostility. Internal self-berating and fear of outside rejection can become so chronic that it can literally harass people into depression and anxiety, according to Gilbert. CFT overlaps with therapies developed to treat trauma, which address early memories, recognize negative thoughts, and correct misperceptions. For some clients who struggle with shame and self-criticism, being able to counter unreasonable thoughts isn't enough. Without self-compassion, the logic does not translate into feeling better. CFT replaces feelings of hostility and insecurity towards oneself with compassion and understanding, so that clients can begin to soothe themselves, accept soothing from others, and generate feelings of contentment and safety. Developed in the early 21st century, by Paul Gilbert, the CFT approach incorporates theories, principles, and techniques from various schools of psychology, treatment, modalities, and religion. CBT, developmental psychology, evolutionary psychology, social psychology, neuroscience, Buddhist philosophy. And working as an integrative therapist, I think we tend to, I found that looking through this theory and studying it, there's a lot of overlaps, especially with, I would say, some TA, psychodynamic and CBT. So CFT is grounded in current understanding of basic emotion regulation systems, the threat of self-protection system, the drive and excitement system, and the contentment and social safeness system. Treatment sessions highlight the association between these systems and human thoughts and behaviours. The aim of CFT is to bring these three effect systems into balance. So what is compassion? So according to the Dalai Lama, sensitivity to the suffering of self and others with a deep wish and commitment to relieve the suffering. One of the founders, Paul Gilbert, suggested deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and living beings, coupled with the wish and effort to alleviate it. And two pioneers from the USA, Chris Gerber and Kristen Neff, compassion is the emotional attitude that accompanies mindfulness when suffering is encountered. So why compassion? So as therapists, we have empathy with our clients, and it's an ability to relate to another person's pain as if it's our own. Empathy, like sympathy, is grounded in emotion and feeling, but empathy doesn't have an active component to it. The component of action is what separates compassion from empathy, sympathy, pity, concern, condolence, sensitivity, tenderness, commiseration, or any other compassion synonym. Compassion gets involved. When others keep their distance from those who are suffering, compassion prompts us to act on their behalf. So as human beings, most of us have a natural capacity for compassion. Compassion is a natural and automatic response that has endured our survival. Louis Cozzoloni points out, we are not survival of the fittest, we are the survival of the nurtured, further stating those who are nurtured best survive best. So this is the interactive flow of compassion, out of Paul Gilbert's book. So we work with clients. So to have self-compassion, we have to have compassion for others, and we have to have compassion from others. If any of these parts are not in cycle, if one of them is missing, then we will work with the client to kind of build up a compassion itself by focusing on each of these. This is going to come up throughout the PowerPoint, and we'll come back to it throughout at different points. So one of the main terms that we use in CFT is the term, the tricky brain. So we'll work with clients to explore and develop understanding of how their tricky brain works. So one of our biggest hurdles of being human is how we handle our tricky brain. Whoever we are, we go through life experiences with a brain that leaves us vulnerable to difficult negative emotions, including anxiety, depression, shame, and anger. One of the first steps to overcoming any emotional difficulty can be to learn to understand your mind and how it's only trying to help. The evolution of the tricky brain. The human brain is a product of evolution. The brain is a marvelous thing if you think of the positive potential and capabilities of human beings. Over the centuries, societies have made advances in science, knowledge, art, and technology in ways that are truly astonishing. While it's open to debate that all of these advances are a good thing, there's no question that the human brain capacities to think, reason, plan, invent, and create are immense. The problem with our tricky brain stems from the simple fact that our brain still retains many old functions from the evolutionary past, our old mammal brains. Our brains are ruled by complex motivations for survival, food, reproduction, status, and caring, all of which were essential for the survival of our species. There are also primary emotions of anger, anxiety, sadness, and joy, all of which motivated us to take action, whether that was to fight, take flight, shut down, find food, compete for resources, or find a partner, or engage in caring for the young. One way of thinking about this is to picture a zebra in the wild. The zebra is happily gazing with his pack when along comes a lion. The lion gives chase and the zebra flees for survival. On this occasion, the zebra gets away. It then wanders back to the herd and continues to graze. Its threat system served it well. The threat system kicked in and the zebra's body took over, ensuring its best chances of survival in a real life or death chase. If that zebra had been gifted with a more human brain, he would have still have that intrinsic fight or flight reflex, but problems could begin after the event. So this is where we would work with clients. And as an integrative therapist, I would tend to explore a lot of these with learned behaviours, defence mechanisms, their ego states, their kinds of thought processes using CBT. So a lot of the integrative modalities we can kind of bring together just to explore even the tricky brain. So our tricky brain, rumination and worry. So on returning to the herd, the zebra may begin to reflect. That was scary. I could have died. I can picture how awful that might be. What if the next time I die? What if I had tripped and fallen? That could have been the end of me. How am I going to prevent that from happening again? Why did the lion pick on me? Did I look weaker than the others? Why didn't anyone help me out there? They all just carried on grazing as if nothing had happened. Maybe they don't like me. What would have happened to my children? So not only would the zebra be given itself a wealth of new threats to dwell upon, but he'd be feeling worse for longer and ruminating about the past and worrying about the future. So this is what happens to humans. In the face of threat, real or imagined, we can bring the threat into our heads and keep it going in creative and unhelpful ways. As humans, we add to our original problem with shame and self-criticism, unhelpful comparisons and negative judgments, all of which can sustain the feeling of threat and create a more persistent cycle of negative emotions. The important thing to remember is that when this happens, this is not your fault or our client's fault. It all comes down to our brain's evolutionary design. And a lot of the times with my clients, when I explore the tricky brain, we not only use a lot of psychoeducation, but I also explore personal constructs. So tricky brains tend to run through generations too. And we can work with clients about changing kind of how a generation's thought processes, even as far as 3 or 4 generations before, can be changed with that client sat in front of you. We can take responsibility for our tricky brains and learn to manage it. Once we can see under the bonnet, it becomes easier to understand and work with it for boils. There is a freedom and a power in knowing this. So we're going to look now at the threat system. So our tricky brains are kind of designed to live in the threat system. So if we have a client, for example, with anxiety, social anxiety, the first thing I would explore with them is their threat system and where these threats come from. I would also work integratively and explore where they learn behaviours. Are they family constructs? Are they social constructs? At the moment, a lot of threat systems I'm working with children are coming from social media. So let's look at the threat system. So the threat system operates on a better be safe than sorry principle. It aims to keep us alive by scanning for and identifying threats. We need our threat system. It's when we overuse it. The threat system has been fine-tuned by thousands of years of evolution. Our threat systems have evolved to detect threats quickly and mobilize a response that can ensure our ultimate survival. This is very helpful when having to fight a tiger or a dinosaur, but it is unhelpful when we're faced with having emotions or memories that we would rather not have. So when we're anxious about trying to solve problems, especially if they're in the future. Our threat system is powerful. It can activate powerful bursts of feelings that alert us to threats, and this can motivate us to take action. The threat system does this by creating feelings of anxiety, fear, or aversion in response to potentially threatening stimuli. The behavioral ramifications include fight or flight response, or submission, or a self-attacking and self-criticism. The threat system involves stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. Research shows that we're biased towards processing threat-based information. We know that negative information captures our attention, thinking, and memory much more powerfully than does positive information. This is referred to as negative bias. We feel the sting of being reprimanded much more powerfully than we feel the joy of praise. We also know that threat-based emotion, fear, anger, disgust, organize our brain and bodies in powerful ways that motivate us to protect ourselves and eliminate the source of the threat in order to stay safe. This all makes perfect sense from an evolutionary point of view. So think, again, survival of the fittest. When balanced with the two other systems, the threat system helps alert us to potential threats and obstacles, and helps us to help our lives moving in desired directions. Due to our brain's ability to manage and imagine and ruminate, it's possible to keep this system running even in the absence of any actual external threat. This means that if we spend lots of time living unnecessarily in a state of threat, our world will be experienced as potentially stressful, anxiety-provoking, exhausting, or an overwhelming place to be. So the three-system model. So we have the threat system, which is anger, fear, and disgust. The function is to help us identify and respond to threats in the world in a healthy way. The drive system, which is excitement and joy, motivates us to move towards resources and goals that might be helpful to us. And the soothing system, contentment, calmness, and safeness. This function is to help us engage in periods of rest and peacefulness when we are not threatened or trying to achieve things, orientate us to give care to others and receive care from others. So here's an example of the CFT threat system. So we've got the drive, which is pursuing, striving, achievement. So it's goal directed and it gets things done for us. We've got the soothing, which is our calm, safe, cared for and nurtured. It's helpful, not harmful, and it motivates us for rest and digest and connects us with needs for self. And then we have the threat system, the most powerful protective mechanism. So it's evolved to keep us safe, the fight or flight or freeze response, and it's always on. Unfortunately, it gets things wrong, and we call these in CFT false positives. So the evolution overview of Paul Gilbert's model. So he states that we have an old brain and share competencies with other mammals, and includes our motives, safety, food and shelter, our emotions, anger, anxiety, sadness, joy and lust, our behaviors, fight, flight, withdraw and engage, relationship, sex, power, status, attachment, tribalism. And then he talks about the new brain, which is relatively recent in evolutionary development. And this includes imagination, planning, rumination, mentalization, self-awareness and identity, and our social brain, need for affection and care, and are socially responsive and self-experience and motives. The first, psychology of compassion, so engagement with distress. So engagement with distress involves paying attention to it and turning towards it. So when we work with CFT, we'll find out what is kind of distressing the client and really sit with it in the moment and pay attention to it and discuss it and explore it. The ability to be aware of and notice suffering and to move towards it rather than being unaware, denying, avoiding, turning away from suffering. And there are 6 core attributes of qualities to help us with the first, psychology. And they are sensitivity, sympathy, care for well-being, non-judgmental, empathy, and distress tolerance. So we'd work with these with the client, exploring them to self, and trying to build up a level of compassion, self-compassion. The second, psychology of compassion, is alleviation of distress. So a desire to acquire the skills and wisdom to try and do something about suffering. Courage, understanding, and wisdom. And compassionate attention, compassionate reasoning and thinking, compassionate sensory focusing, and compassion behavior, compassionate feelings, and compassionate imaginary. The compassion circles, the key attributes of compassion. So this is including part the first and the second. So we would then build on attention, feeling, sensory, behavior, reasoning, and imagery. So we'd work with the client through all of these. We're going to go on to later on in the workshop, go through a formulation that we use with clients and some different interventions that we would use to work with all of this. So helping clients to understand how difficulties arise. So we're all shaped by our experiences. We all have tricky brains. We want to help our clients understand. So why might they be suffering? Consider how difficulties may be maintained and bring compassion to their difficulties. Okay, so I am just going to stop sharing for a minute and I'm going to bring up the side part. So see if we've got any questions. So yeah, all of these slides, I'm recording this as we do it. So you'll all get the recording of the whole thing with all the questions and the whole slides. Anybody got any other questions so far? No, we're all good. You're happy to carry on? Okay. Okay, so this is an example of a formulation for CFT. So we've got, I'm going to go through this in the coming slides as well. We've got key historical influences, key fears and threats, protective safety strategies, and unintended consequences. So under key historical influences, it would be what key historical experiences have influenced the client. So for me, integratively, I will form this from a person-centered foundation. So really get to know my client, find out what's brought them to therapy, kind of what's going on for them, and who they are and what they're all about. So key fears and threats. So given historical experiences, what fears have you been left with? So if we look at this one, so parents divorced when I was 8 years old before they had argued a lot. Others untrustworthy, other people will reject me, and so on and so on. But we would explore the external threats and the internal. So the internal, I would say, with a lot of my clients, integrally about their core beliefs, their personal constructs. And I feel that constructs would tie in with both external and internal. So protective strategies, So given key fears, what safety strategies has the client developed? So for me, I would start exploring here defense mechanisms, constructs that they've rewrote to get through in the world, and how it motivates them as their internal. So maybe keep feelings to self, don't push, self or strive. And then unintended consequences. So have your safety strategies led you to unintended or unforeseen consequences? So kind of where they're at right now. So not achieving, feeling depressed, sad maybe, not wanting to be in a relationship, could be anything. And I would work through this with the client and we would do it jointly. At the bottom, you can see how you would work through this. So for key historical influences, empathy and understanding that I did not choose these experiences. So as you go through this with the client, you would make these statements, and this awareness at the bottom is what the client would get. We would do this using CFT interventions, and when we do the working with the case study, I will go through a client that I use CFT with and their formulation, which they've kind of agreed that I can use, and show you how and what, not just using CFT, but how I used integrative therapy. So we used person-centered, psychodynamic, TA, and CFT and CBT in parts. This is later on as well, so I'll come back to this. So the formulation stages in a little bit more depth. So the first one is historical influences, so family, school, relationships, career experiences. I would form this from a person-centered base, but I would also be listening for personal constructs, conditions of worth, and possibly some core beliefs that they've kind of have influenced them in their life when they come for therapy. Step 2, how our background experiences have affected our threat system. So external, how others may think, feel or treat us. So for example, is your client present with a fear of rejection, abandonment or exclusion, distrust of others, think others people will harm them, criticize or laugh at us? The internal fears, identity, feeling unworthy, not good enough. We may feel that our feelings will overwhelm us and that emotions are bad. So feeling intruding memories from the past or a sense of loneliness, so disconnected and separate. Step 3, how do we protect ourselves from our fears? So protective strategies used to manage external fears. So avoidance of getting close to people or situations that can make us feel anxious. Avoid relying on others. Submissive, head down, passive, not assertive. Hypervigilant, identifying potential external threats so we can fix or deal with them. I think it's really important as well to mention here that when using CFT, psychoeducation is paramount. So clients kind of really, before we do the formulation, they understand about the origins of a tricky brain. They understand, and we explored their tricky brain. We also look at the systems and especially kind of work out their threat systems, not just from where they are in that session presently, but also their threat systems from childhood right up till the point where you're working with them. And reassurance seeking or staying close to others. So protective strategies used to manage internal feelings. So our clients may suppress feelings, trying to feel worthy, striving to achieve. Self-criticism, beat ourselves up for things we don't like about ourselves, or reduce feelings of aloneness by trying to be closer to others. So step 4, the unintended consequence of safety strategies. Protective strategies can lead to unintended and unpleasant consequences external. So if your client tries to avoid others, the unintended consequence may be that I'm left feeling alone. If I do everything to please others, then I may be hurt that my feelings are not being acknowledged or needs met, unintended consequence. And the protective strategies can lead to unintended and unpleasant consequences internal by listening to our clients blaming themselves for everything, may impact on self-esteem and self-consequence. Suppressing emotions may lead to an increase in those feelings. And the last step, step 5, so it's feedback loops. So self-to-self relating, so criticize and help self, hate self feeds back to feeling alone, not good enough, and overwhelmed. So going back to the formulation, we would kind of work through each of those 5 stages. And I would say working with CFT, just exploring these stages could take anything from 3 to 6 weeks, because as an integrative therapist, we also bring in our other modalities. So it would look at, you know, the client's self-esteem, self-confidence, their conditions of worth, their core beliefs, their defense mechanisms, and kind of, I like to do a lot of psychoeducation with my clients. So we would also be kind of doing homework and working on this outside of the sessions. So we're going to take a look now at one of the main principles of CFT, which is about exploring the resistance, the fears, and the blocks to compassion, whether it be self-compassion or compassion for others. So I'm going to call them FBRs. So for fears, frightened, we will become weak. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And I've found that with a lot of clients when I've been doing CFT, a lot of constructs, whether it be social, educational, or family, around compassion is that it's selfish and that it's weak. So that's a real big fear, and it doesn't sit right with many people. So blocks, these are things that get in the way. So busy lifestyles, so I haven't got time to think about myself. Those types of comments we'll hear. And then there's resistances. We're not frightened or blocked, but simply don't want to engage in compassion. So for example, why be compassionate to them? They brought it on themselves to others. Or I don't deserve to be more compassionate to myself. I'm useless. So with clients like that, I would integrate looking at their self-esteem, but then going back to this and seeing if we can get a different outcome. So another way to describe fear, blocks, and resistance. So fears, when we would like to be compassionate, but we're frightened at the feelings that arise when we try or worry about what might happen to us if we become more compassionate. So this one, I think, really stood out for me because I have a lot of clients who are, well, if I actually be more compassionate to myself, I'll have to like myself. I'll have to do things that people who like themselves do. So it's really a big topic to explore around the fears. The blocks, they arise when people would like to be compassionate and are not frightened of it, but find that things seem to get in the way of this happening. And in my experience working with CFT, I do a lot of work there around defense mechanisms, because a lot of the time it is avoidance and denial. Or they project a lot of compassion onto others, but none to themselves. And resistance, when we're not frightened or blocked to compassion, but we simply don't want to engage in it. So we then would go on to cultivating the soothing system. So first, one of an example of this is body posture. And it can have an impact on how we feel. If we are tense, the threat system can be triggered. In CFT, we aim to bridge out of the threat system towards our soothing. So I'd work with clients about how they're sitting, how they spend their day, how they're sitting in the session, and explore that. When we do this, it helps us to feel more grounded and confident. Our facial expression can also help us to bridge from threat to soothing. So research, students, chopsticks and cartoons. I'm going to add them all onto the, there's some really good videos that I'll put up onto the group, and I'll also put the body posture activity on as well onto the Facebook group. So soothing, rhythm, breathing. So the way we breathe also has an impact on our bodies. So think about the importance of the breath for musicians, actors and people in sports. So don't know whether many of you as an integrative therapist already do a lot of this in sessions, but I really like to do this with clients, especially clients who are working with anxiety, depression, low mood. The autonomic nervous system helps us to regulate digestion, respiration, and heart rate, and has two major branches. The sympathetic nervous system helps guide the body's fight or flight response and is linked to the threat system. The parasympathetic nervous system, its function is to slow down or balance the SNS. Scientists have found we can stimulate this system by changing body posture, facial expression, and practicing certain types of breathing. And language and words can impact on our positive and negative emotions. I like to use the language that clients use a lot, especially shoulds, musts, needs, ought to. And I find using should lists with clients really opens up the negative message that we send about failure, shame and guilt. And a lot of the time, what they feel they should be doing, they're already doing. And voice tones. So hearing the voices of our caregivers can increase oxytocin levels and reduce stress. So the sixth one is focus of attention. So when anxious or distressed, we can learn to redirect our attention away from our bodies. So use an SRB, but also hold an object that has a soothing, calming texture. The focus of attention would be the texture of the object. Apps that change size or shape can also help us to redirect our attention away from our bodies. We have smells, nice smells. Clients could use anything, we call it a soothing kit bag. So anything that your client likes. So it could be photographs as well. It could be visual, smells, feeling, anything. Music. Playlists that help change our mood or make us feel calm or soothed. And the kit bag or the first aid kit, whichever you want to call it, kind of build this over time with your client. And it's so important that all of the ideas for their kit bag comes from them, but are developed from work, from cultivating it in the sessions. So the soothing system allows us to soothe ourselves and also to soothe others. It's linked with experiences given, receiving, affection, elicit and receiving care from others, acceptance, kindness, warmth, encouragement, support, and affiliation. Research suggests that these behaviours can weaken the toxic effects of the threat drive systems, and that the soothing system can bring us a sense of calm, safeness, and peace. So working with CFT. Compassion-focused therapy was developed to help those with mental health issues that are maintained by feelings of shame or self-criticism. CFT is based on evolutionary psychology and the latest neuroscience of emotions. It teaches practical skills to help people bring into balance the brain's three emotional systems so they can self-soothe and deal with difficult emotions such as anger, shame, anxiety, fear, depression, and self-criticism. A major component of CFT is to work with the fears, blocks, and resistances, to working with the soothing system, which are essentially just outdated protective strategies that are no longer helpful because their consequences now play out in very complex and unworkable ways. The fears, blocks and resistances are all completely understandable once the impact of one's developmental history and one's early learning about positive emotions such as soothing is considered. Okay, I'm just going to come off sharing and going to do some questions before we end. So Paula, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Paula Taylor?
I haven't got any questions.
You put one about meditation.
Yeah, I use a lot of meditation and breathing exercises with my clients with anxiety.
Okay.
I find it quite effective.
What do you think about the soothing kit bag idea with CFT?
I think that's brilliant. I use a lot of soothing boxes for my clients, and it really does work.
Does it? What are your thoughts on CFT so far?
Really, really good. Yeah. I do agree with what one lady said about the polyvagal theory.
Yeah, I do. I agree. There are lots of overlaps, massively.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is it Sultana? Would you like to ask your question? Turn your mic off, on. Is she there? Okay, we'll go to Ashley. Ashley, do you want to tell us what you said?
Yeah, I use a lot of first aid kits for clients so they can choose, and it, you know, they like that particular music. What does it do for them?
Yeah.
What do they do to self-soothe? And sometimes clients can not realize that they have this toolkit. So creating that self-awareness around that and pulling it together can increase their self-confidence.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know whether this is right or whatever, but to calm their inner critic, you know, I'm not doing that. Well, you are really, you know. And if you give them some, I've actually made, you know, some with them, you know, like shoe boxes and things.
Yeah.
So it's tangible.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah.
So do you make them in the sessions, Ash?
Yeah, sometimes. And even
brilliant.
if it's just gone from, you know, just writing it down if they journal. But it's something tangible that they can take away.
When you said, Ash, about kind of looking at the inner critic, can you see the overlaps there with self-compassion?
Yeah, massively.
Yeah. So that's where I found as an integrative therapist, when I now bring in this theory and we look at the flow of compassion, compassion for self, compassion for others, etc., I find that being able to focus on the inner critic, it's like learning. You can work with added to be able to add that learning to be compassionate massively affects how the client sees their inner critic.
I think it's a big shock. I don't know how anybody else feels, but when clients, you ask them who's the most important person, and they will always come forward with children, partners, etc. And when you say, well, it's you. Well, no. And it's as if they're not allowing themselves that.
Yeah, I agree. And it also, I've found when you use the flow of compassion, clients can see how when we have compassion for others and we take compassion from others, if we haven't got compassion for self, what is the motive for all of that? You know, are we being compassionate to others to make ourselves feel better without doing that ourselves? Interesting. Thanks, Ash.
Thank you.
Okay. Charmaine, you said you used, do you want to share what toolkit you use and turn your mic on? That'd be really interesting.
Hiya. Yeah, I speak a lot about what helps soothe in terms of a lot of my clients use oil diffusers. So we talk about lavenders and you know, natural oil diffusers or aromatherapy bracelets, because
that's really interesting.
Aromatherapy bracelets, they're on eBay for like £8-9. They're amazing. You just have a little sponge pad inside each one, and you can use different pads for different scents, and then it's on your wrist and it just looks like a beautiful Tree of Life bracelet. And yeah,
that sounds great. I worked with a client a long time ago who was really bad self-harmer, and we tried many things and she never came to stop. She just wanted to gain control of it, and after trying so many different interventions, the one she actually was receptive to was smell. So I used a burner in the session. But what a great idea that is, because the client then took the oil that we used in the session and just put it on a handkerchief so that she would remember the work she was doing. But that's a brilliant idea. I'll have a look at them.
We explored it because I said, I noticed that she wore a lot of bangles and things on her wrist.
Yeah.
So we were like, how can we utilize this so it's more with you where you go?
Yeah.
And then like we try and reflect self-care kits against like grounding techniques like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So what is it? Is there anything kinesthetic? Is there anything smelly you particularly like? Is there anything that sounds that soothe? So I say if we're going to be so technological, are there any rain sounds or various things that you can put on as an app? But then to obviously encourage them to not stare at a screen if it's part of sleep hygiene, to listen to it, but put the phone down.
Okay, thanks, Shemaine.
Thanks.
Pam, do you want to share what you put?
Yeah, I agree with the people who've mentioned about the importance of breathing and the mindfulness.
Yeah.
To introduce that into these sessions alongside the likes of the work you can do around body posture and facial expression. I think it just naturally dovetails into what we do. But I'm really interested in the kits that you've talked about, Jo.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether or not we could also, that would apply to people who are dealing with kind of the bereavement, and they could use that as I'm just wondering whether I've got a client, it might be useful for her she brings lots of pictures and they talk about her husband, and wondering whether that thing could still apply to somebody else, not the clients.
Absolutely, because I think because the theory is compassion based, could easily bring it in for compassion for self. So anything about building a soothing kit bag is about what's best for you. And if they want to do that for anyone, so if there's any other one who suffer from this bereavement, they can also do kit bags for them, and that's compassion for us.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Thanks, Jo.
Okay. Dan Jones, you want to know more about the tool bag?
It just a really good idea. Just wondering, like, kind of what goes in it and how you bring it into the therapy room.
So you go through the process, so the 6 parts to the soothing process, and there's lots of different interventions that I'm going to do when I do the case study, and they build it. So for what might be for one client might not be for another. So I've had clients who've put music in, they've put like this kind of toy that they found that they had, what was it? The pony, My Little Pony. She found a My Little Pony because it reminded her of childhood, and smell, whereas other clients wouldn't have put none of that in. So it's very individual.
Yeah. And what was that bracelet called that the other lady was just speaking about? Shemaine
said it was an aromatherapy bracelet.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to have a look at them for self-harm clients.
Just have a look on eBay. I can't guarantee quality, guys. I'm just saying. There's a lovely little Tree of Life one, and it's kind of got a wrap around. It wraps around double-A. There's various different ones. Get ones with pads though, please, because otherwise, obviously, the oil's going to go everywhere, and some don't seem to sell them with pads.
That's a really good point.
Don't want complaints about skin reactions.
Okay, thank you. Is that enough, Dan?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
All right. Neil, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it was just in your practice, what do you find the differences then are from kind of traditional integrative approaches compared to what you've taken from CFT?
So I find that with CFT, it is a whole other theory based. It's I take elements from it. I think the biggest one is the compassion, the flow of compassion. So we may work in the case study, for example, a big part of it was drama triangle, ego states, defense mechanisms. And then the last 6 weeks, we just did CFT. So it's like the wind down, and the client just learned how to kind of forgive herself and show herself compassion. She was okay with receiving compassion. And I find that a lot of clients can feel compassion from others as pity. So we did a lot of work around that. But I would say it's a standalone. Is that answered your question?
Yeah, it has. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Dan Jones, how do you introduce and put it together? Is that what we just talked about?
Yeah, Joe, yeah, you've answered all my questions.
All right.
I've just sent you the link as well to that bracelet on eBay. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks, Dan. We'll put it on the page as well in case anybody else wants it. Andy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, it was more of an observation than a question. It was,
Okay.
I was thinking, is it more normalized, or do you find with it's more men struggle with this as opposed to women in terms of being self-compassionate towards themselves, particularly because if you're looking at historical stereotypes of men, it's not normal to be compassionate towards yourself. It's more about being hard on yourself if you don't achieve certain things or you're not at a particular level, especially men are very competitive as well. So it's almost counterintuitive to the way that men are conditioned to be. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think I agree with you. And I think women not find it easier. Men struggle, but I find younger kind of adults and children really struggle with it because of social media. So they're used to being so comparative and judgmental about themselves and others on social media. They really struggle. But when I work with men with this, prior to that, integratively, when we've been exploring the tricky brain, we've done a lot of work around the evolution side of it, and then the personal constructs of males in their family, the rules and perceptions that they should live by. So by the time we come to work on the compassion side, a lot of those beliefs have already been challenged and kind of rewrote, and different core beliefs have been explored and possibly, hopefully, rewrote, if that makes sense.
Sure, it does. Yeah, thanks for answering that.
What are you thinking about CFT?
Say again, sorry.
What are your thoughts on CFT?
I think it's really effective. I've noticed that a lot of clients, particularly with depression and anxiety, they don't realise how hard they are being on themselves. So sometimes just a very change in attitude towards themselves can alleviate the way they're feeling by maybe 30%. So I think it's really useful, and I like the idea, like others have said, of the soothing system, because it gives clients things that they can go away and do, and it increases the self-awareness to the body posture, facial expressions, breathing, and it will make them realise that there's more things within the control that they can change.
Yeah,
so it's quite positive as well, isn't it?
Yeah, very positive. And I do like to kind of end with clients on CFT. I find it really kind of, it's a nice, you've got to that point and we do an overview of all the work done, and then we work on compassion for self. But it is, it's nice if the client goes away with something that they can keep forever and use forever as well.
Definitely,
okay.
sure.
Thanks, Andy.
No worries.
Ashley?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Ash, you wrote something on about collar.
Yeah, I don't know which lady mentioned it earlier on about someone bringing photographs and using the self-compassion in grief.
Yeah.
And I had someone who brought some photographs in, and to extend that self-compassion, she made a collage of all these pictures, and it was to remember the person with a smile. So that was the compassion to herself.
That's lovely.
To not to be constantly grieving. So it worked in that way. If that's what's applicable, you know, but she extended that to herself, and it was something again that they could take away.
Yeah. I think it's a lovely idea, isn't it? And how are you finding the CFT? What are you on it? Yeah.
Well, I got a new supervisor recently, and he told me that I very much work in this way.
Okay.
That
good.
And he said, you know, that I'm very I don't know. I'll be very honest. When you first started, I was a bit overwhelmed with all the jargon, and I was thinking, oh, I don't know it, or you know, and it was a bit, oh my God, what am I doing? But looking at it and how we do extend that self-compassion in that diagram you showed with the 3 sections, it was Mike that said, he said, I suggest you read into it.
Yeah, you've just blew Mike up as your supervisor.
Sorry. I'm sure that was red. Confidential.
He'll be beetroot. I think as integrative therapists, what I've found is most of my supervisees as well all work with compassion. So CFT becomes quite a natural. It is jargony, and that's why I wanted to do the introduction before we do the case study, so everyone can kind of take this away, have a read of it, possibly do some more wider reading. There's loads of wider reading at the end of this, and when we come back to do the working with and the actual work that happened in the counselling room, it'll all make sense a lot more. But I'm glad it made sense after the beginning.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Ash. Sue Grant, do you want to talk about what you've put?
Hi, and thank you. No, I was just saying that one of the other senses that a lot of my clients connect to can be kinesic. They might have a piece of fabric, or, as you say, a toy or something which they want to stroke, and that I find quite a lot of my clients end up having soft, furry toys. It can be very important to them. And one of them likes Parma violets and the smell of Parma violets, and they take her back to childhood. And for them, that was a really useful trigger. It was times that were good, and so when she's really compelled to do certain unhealthy behaviours, then going into that kind of taking out some of her tools, you know, can be quite useful. But when the one I'm thinking of at the moment is so severely involved with self-harming that she's just desperate. It's amazing that through this time, only once in between lockdowns did she self-harm because of the COVID. So I've just been trying to highlight to her, and she knows that she's choosing not to do it whilst the COVID's going on. But she also knows that she's absolutely desperate to go back to it. And I mean, I've used other things, like obviously saying try holding ice and other things which might possibly give her a level of pain without actually going, you know, to the cutting level. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to using this. I'm actually working with her tomorrow as it happens.
Oh, good. I think when I show clients the compassion flow chart, it really kind of brings home that you can't have compassion for others or receive it from others without having compassion for self. So it kind of can give clients a good focus to home in on.
That's so true. And when I work with people, because I'm don't do supervision, but I'm a practice manager as well.
Yeah.
And if I explain to them about mutual respect, and I'll ask certain newly qualified practitioners, their definition of mutual respect, usually they understand listening, being non judgmental, respecting unconditionally, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But then I said, that's absolutely correct, you're completely right, but anything else? And quite often that's where they stop, and I'll say, well, that's showing that you're showing respect to your client, which is excellent.
Yeah.
But when it comes to mutual respect, you need to demonstrate to them that if the week before they didn't pay on time and you've had to chase them up and keep checking your bank account 3 times, or if when they were supposed to start at 11 o'clock, you couldn't get hold of them till 20 past and they didn't tell you that something was overrunning and they already knew it, but they didn't mind about whatever. Basically, you need to demonstrate how much you respect yourself, because if you don't model that, if I don't model that to my clients, then it's not a practical application of them realizing, for me to respect you, first and foremost, I need to demonstrate how I respect myself. And so that kind of comes into, I think that can be self-compassion being modeled by the practitioner.
Yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. And then it begs the question, as practitioners, if we don't have compassion for self, how could we work with CFT? It's real difficult. Yeah. Thank you, Sue.
Pleasure.
Gloria, do you want to ask your question?
Just in terms of evaluation, because obviously all approaches have got strengths and weaknesses, have you noticed, or do you think that there's any drawbacks to using this approach?
I mean, like any theory, it's not for every client, you know, and there's some clients that I've worked with where I feel it would be beneficial, but I know from working with them that this isn't their type of thing. I think you really do have to know your client. I think the biggest difficulty I find with CFT is when we're not, as a therapist, feeling very compassionate for self. You know, if you're having a bit of a bad day and you want to work, you can fit it kind of really kind of have to self-reflect and kind of make sure that there's no transference. The difficulty part, which I'll go through some of the interventions when we do the case study, is the chair work with fears, blocks and resistances. So it's very different from the empty chair, as there's 3 chairs, 1 with the client and 2 empty. And that can be really difficult unless you're feeling really confident with it, because they kind of use imaginary feelings instead of people and talking to just that feeling. And the client is talking to, so say the client were concentrating on guilt. So the client will stay seated and then the guilt part of them will move to the chair and you will talk to that part like a third person. So for example, it'd be like, so how do you kind of, what do you bring to Victoria's life? So, and the client has sat watching. So that can be really difficult. And it took me a while to kind of really knowing the theory to start working with interventions like that. But I think like anything, they're just new. And the more that you have a go, the more you learn your strengths and weaknesses with it and you build up confidence. So I would say it's confidence is probably the biggest difficulty.
Thank you.
Okay. Pina, do you want to talk about your agreement with the men's struggle? Are you there? Just need to unmute, Pina.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, so I was agreeing with the gentleman that we talked about how men struggle with self-compassion.
Yeah.
The tools that I use is basically it's a box, and inside this box, you take the lid off and there's all sorts of artifacts and tiny toys. like planes, bikes, footballs, and everything from soldiers to men's stuff and ladies stuff. And the one that springs to mind is this guy was getting married, and he came along, and he loved his fiance, but he was overwhelmed with the pressures.
Yeah.
So I just put the box next to him, and I says, we don't need to do this. I says, but have a look inside there and pull out what you think, jumps out at you. Tell me how you're feeling. And he pulled out lots and lots of things, and there was nothing on the table that told me about him. It was all about pressure. It was, they already had children. It was all about providing, pressure, doing the right thing. And I said to him, so where are you? He says, well, I'm here. And I said, yes, but where are you in these tools? I said, you have friendships. Do you like fishing? There was a fishing net and things like that, football, rugby. And he said, he pulled out a tiny football, and he was chucking it in the air and catching it. And he said, well, I used to play football. He says, but I've had to give it up because I was never home. And I said, well, how does that make you feel? And he said, well, I don't know, as long as I do right by my fiance and the kids and her mother and so and so and so and so.
Oh, okay.
And it was quite overwhelming, and for him especially, because there was no level of compassion for self at all. And we started to work on that really, because he just didn't have it. It was quite sad really, and all the injunctions that he brought with him from negative script messages from in the past, from his youth, like don't exist, don't succeed. So I felt that a CFT was, the way you've described it this evening was fantastic. So we'll continue with that.
It'd be really good, and with a client like that, it would be really interesting, Pina, wouldn't it, to work on then the fears, blocks, and resistances.
Yeah,
that's what he's displaying to you, isn't it? And when you separate them, you can really kind of dig deep and explore them.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Abbott, do you want to go next?
Yeah, go on then. I'll try.
Okay.
Love to go. Yeah. So initially, you spoke about like the importance of getting to know the client's history, the past, and how kind of influential it kind of sounded when you were talking. To kind of unraveling what kind of method you'd use with the client, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd work through the tricky brain and explore that. Now we might integrate that earlier on when we're looking at thought processes, self-esteem, core beliefs. So the tricky brain would sit alongside that, and I'd bring that psychoeducation in there.
Yeah.
And then looking at the threat system, that would kind of come throughout as well and link in with other theories.
Yeah.
But I think not knowing what to work best, there's kind of with CFT, it's a formulation. So you work through all of it. What you could do early on with your client, once you've got a really good basis and they've done some work and you're ready to start working on the 3 flows of compassion, probably then do the formulation with the client.
Right. Okay.
And then the interventions will sit, which what you'll see in the work and with CFT is the formulation that I did with the client. I've given examples of the interventions we did in each phase of that formulation.
Right. Okay. I love that.
But yeah, I mean, just as some therapists do work solely with CFT and it still works. But I think as integrative counsellors, we can really kind of delve and dig deeper, so our clients have kind of understanding of a lot more than just the compassion side.
Yeah, and it's just like, because obviously with the resistance, fear and blocks as well, that kind of stuck out to me, because obviously that's something that I kind of come across with clients and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like you say, I think working working through that with that kind of formulations is really helpful. But
yeah, it
yes,
is. And I think, ironically, one of the biggest personal constructs that I've come across is a lack of compassion, whether it's from family, society, education. And that tends to be a real big construct that's with a lot of clients and a lot of people. I think we're in a world where, you know, we do for others more than we do for ourselves. I think it's our generation.
Definitely, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Liz, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I've just realised I put parachutes instead of whatever it is that you actually have on aeroplanes now. I just saying, I think I find in a lot of work what I do with clients, not necessarily just coming into it from this angle, but just reminding them that they really do have to look after themselves before they look after anybody else. And I use that airline comparison. You know, when they always do that at the beginning, they tell you, you know, if there's an emergency, to put on your own oxygen mask and your own life jacket. That's what it is. That's the word I should have used instead of parachute. Before you look after anybody else, because unless you're okay, then you're not going to be able to help anybody else. So that's the basis of self-compassion work. And I do tend, I was just putting down there as well, I tend to use a lot of NLP techniques in my work. So I will use, especially around modalities. So you talked earlier about language, tone of voice, those kind of things. Well, when you've got all of those, I actually take all those down in terms of a list of all the different modalities that there are, the way that we think about things. And then I ask them to flip them. So instead of thinking if the voice that you're hearing is loud and shouty, you know, I might ask them to flip it to a comedy voice, you know, Donald Duck or something like that. If it's a quiet place, then I'll change that and say, well, you know, you could put some background music on. And again, humor's really good for that kind of thing, getting people to change. Particularly men. So people have talked about men being a little bit more resistant. They are, without doubt. So it's finding ways in, and humor is often a way that you can get men to think about things and just release a little bit of that tension. So there are different ways of doing it.
Okay, thanks, Liz. Okay, guys, I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint so we can do our ending and our checkout, but I've really enjoyed tonight. If you are interested and you've liked the idea, we've only touched on the very basics of it tonight, and I think it will kind of a lot more understanding of how we can work with it integratively will be in the case study and the workshop, and we're going to do that over 2-3 hours, because I think 6 hours in one go for a workshop is a lot. So let me just flip back. Okay. This is also going to be sent to you so you can go over through this recording at any point. So just to go back to here, this is the wider reading. There's quite a lot of it, 4 pages, so feel free to go through it. And find some, there's some books and there's some journals, so whichever takes your fancy. And just to check out, so I just want you to take another minute to choose one word to describe how you feel now. I think it'd be really interesting to see if we've got any people who've got complete opposite to what they were feeling at the beginning. So I just want you to write that down. And if it has changed, I just want you to think about what's changed it. Is it the new awareness? Is it CFT's not for you? Is it that you found it interesting for self and personal and professional? Just like to make a note of that. And look what you wrote at the beginning of the workshop. So at the beginning, I asked you to write down what your idea of CFT is. I'm just going to come back to in a minute and come back to the side panel so we can see if like people to put some reflections in that, if that's okay. And has your understanding of CF changed, and if so, how? Also, we would be so grateful for your feedback, and you can either send that to Chris at Take a Seat, or you can post it straight onto the Facebook page. Also, if you are interested in, just come back to you, one sec. If you are interested in more CFT, let Chris know if you want a place onto the Working With, and that's going to be full case study from start to finish, working integratively. And I'll also hopefully be able to do some demonstrations of the interventions as best I can via Zoom. So has anybody changed completely from what they thought? Is there anybody who actually thought it was a load of rubbish and now feels that it's something they can work with? Dan, you put that you're very motivated by this. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Just need to unmute. There you go.
How's it going? Yeah, no, it's just I had heard of it before, but hadn't really gotten the chance to put much into it. So, you know, I'm kind of busy a lot of the time. So it's good to be able to get my teeth into it a little bit and do a little bit more kind of research now onto it. So it gives me a little bit to go on. Yeah, no, thanks a million. Good,
you're welcome. And I think personally, as part of my personal development, this is something I work on a lot, because I think as therapists, we're kind of used to giving it out. And I think self-care is a big reminder of self-compassion. But good luck with it, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks. Claire Nelson, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, I just didn't realise, because I tend to struggle, I think, to give names to the things that I do.
Yeah.
And sometimes people say to me, oh, you know, what is it? And if I've got to be and put my academic head on, as I call it.
Yeah.
So sometimes I just do. That's what I do. I just do and be. And sometimes putting a name to the things that I do along with my clients is quite nice to see that there's quite a lot of things there that are similarities. So it's really interesting, like I was interested and intrigued before, but to learn other things. And I was just wondering, when we're talking about soothing for men, I had somebody who was an adult male, and he got slight autistic traits. And it was about us actually getting him to build this type of, I suppose, flower cum plant pot, but with tactile things on it and bits of mosaic, and, you know, to reflect the light, but also specific little pots to put in lavenders. And so it was lots of different things, because he liked to be outside, but also building it as well.
Yeah.
A combination of all of it. And he'd still got something there to go and sit next to when he felt stressed. So it's not so much fitting in your tool bag, but it's outside.
Yeah. Are you feeling that you've been using this then without really realising?
Elements, not as in how you're describing, but there's definitely elements, and that's why it makes it even more intriguing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Elaine, you've asked what day the Working With will be on. I'm not sure yet. It will be probably 2 evenings, so that more people can come after work and so on. But we'll let you know as soon as we can. We hopefully want to get this done before Christmas. So I expect, because we don't want to leave it too long from this, because it's a 2 gap, and it'll be everyone having to kind of go over everything again before we do the workshop. We've got Paula. And the other thing as well, guys, that I don't know whether you're all aware that every week we're also doing a peer supervision. So we've done 3 weeks now, and they're so good. There's people from all over the country, but we were doing them on a Wednesday, but we're now starting to alternate them. So it's tomorrow night, if anyone still wants to come. And then next week, we're going to do it Monday. And then the following week, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, just to give more people the opportunity to attend, really. But it's so interesting listening to everyone sharing, you know, good practice. So I'm going to say thank you everyone for participating tonight. It's been so good. I've loved every minute of it. If you've got any feedback, please feel free to send it in or put it on the Facebook page. And if you want a session, a slot to come to the session for the working with CFT, just email Chris as soon as possible. If you want to make sure that you get your space, because we'll have to cap it at some point, so everybody can enjoy it. So I want to thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.